National anthem.
We've lost Ann. She's running. Ann is running.
Okay. It's okay. We've got 2 minutes.
All right. Nope, you're good. I'm afraid of using the podium. No, I could very well become an orator and like stand there and get very excited. James went down and sat with the crowd.
Okay. That's good.
Whatever makes you happy, man.
Yeah. I can run back up and,
Yeah, we'll be back.
managing questions start. You guys are
Yeah,
adults.
that's what James did.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our second session of the LaFrac Holocaust Education Conference. My name is John Spurlock. I'm a professor emeritus of history, Seton Hill University. And I'm delighted to introduce our panel today. Before I do that, though, I just want to take 1 minute to recognize this is November 11th, which traditionally was Armistice Day, originally the day on which hostilities ceased in World War I, and recognized as Armistice Day for many years, and eventually was repurposed, so to speak, as Veterans Day, 1954. So if there are any veterans among you here or online, we just want to recognize your service at this time. And if you're active duty members of the military, then you'll eventually be veterans. So. And I might add that one of our presenters, Dan Shaner, is a veteran. So, this is an important session, and it's one that really extends what we began last night with the presentation by Alexandra Zapruder, in which she talked about extending our reach in terms of the diary literature that's available beyond Anne Frank. If you've read her book, or if you're planning to, you're extremely fortunate. The opening essay by Alexandra Zapruder is on the Anne Frank diary, the real literary weight and value of it, and why it has become such a standard feature of Holocaust education in the United States. Today, our presenters are going to help us think about how to move Holocaust education, move the literature that's being used beyond Anne Frank, not ignoring Anne Frank by any means, but how to extend it beyond that. And we're very fortunate to have our presenters. We must have, what do you guys think, 20 years each, 30 years? 60 years of teaching experience here? Is that? Yeah, at least. Okay. So 60 years of Holocaust education to draw on. Dan Shaner has been, I think, recently retired, but has been for decades a teacher of middle school gifted, but has included Holocaust education. He has managed and set up events in Holocaust education. When he was part of our NEH Institute a couple of years ago, anywhere we went in Pittsburgh, people already knew Dan. So he's somebody that's been involved in this on many levels and for a long time. And Flick is also a live wire. She teaches in Cincinnati, middle school, high school gifted programs, and is also an adjunct teacher for Xavier University. So I'm going to get out of the way so that we can get on with this, and I hope all of you are looking forward to this as much as I am.
Thanks, John. We're going to start with just a brief clip from Deborah Lipstadt. If you've ever seen the movie Denial, she was the one who brought the court case against the Holocaust denier and won. But she is interviewed in Ken Burns' film, The U.S. and the Holocaust, and this is just about a minute long, but it's kind of like the premise for how Dan and I want to take the discussion of Holocaust literature beyond this watershed diary.
This country. It's presented on Broadway and then presented in a major Hollywood picture as a triumph. No one dies in the story. No one is murdered. No gas chambers, no shootings, no Nazis till the last scene when they come in. It's the story of triumph of a little girl. It's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful diary. She writes some terrific things in it. But it's not the story of the Holocaust. It's not the story of the Shoah. It's not the story of a genocide.
So Dan and I are going to switch out today. Dan has a great list of texts that we can use to extend that story for our students. Is that not it?
That's not mine. Mine is the PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
All right. First of all, John, you said something about me being a Holocaust expert. Sister Gemma's in the audience. That's a lot of pressure being in front of Sister Gemma. I have a bunch of slides, basically, as it says. Oh, let's hit slideshow. That didn't do it. Hit done again. Oh, I hit share, didn't I? I'm retired. I don't have to know how to do this anymore. As I said, I had 35 years doing this. I got out with some of my sanity, none of my hair, and we're ready to start this. We're dealing with Holocaust literature for the middle level classroom because that's where our expertise lies, and it's beyond Anne Frank. I absolutely love Anne Frank. If it wasn't for Anne Frank, I wouldn't have ever taught Holocaust literature. She's what got me involved. But she's one story, as Dr. Lipstadt is saying there, she's one story out of over 6 million, and all 6 million stories need to be so told. So that's what we're going by here. My rationale, not all K-12 students in America receive any Holocaust education at all, and for many of them that do, it starts in a middle level classroom with the Diary of Anne Frank, and often it ends there. What we're doing here is to take these steps, what we could teach beyond Anne Frank in the middle level classroom. And all of my education, everything I've done since I started teaching, goes back to this quote by Elie Wiesel: if there's ever a rationale, this is it. Whatever you learn, remember the learning must make you more, not less human. So that's what I concentrate on every day in my classroom for the last 35 years. So I have, and you'll get this when you get the paperwork, an annotated bibliography of texts that I've used in the middle level classroom with varying degrees of success and how they worked, and my suggestions for you. And all of this is available to you. Let's skip to one. There we go. The first. This is individual group reading. Mona Golubeck's The Children of Williston Lane, a true story of hope and survival during World War II. This is a story of Lisa Jora, Mona Golubeck's mother. Lisa was a teenage girl in Vienna when the Anschluss took place. She was very lucky, was able to get out in the kinder transport. She got to England. This is her story of life in Williston Lane, which is a orphanage in England for the students who came, for the children who came across in the kinder transport. There are two versions of this. This is the young adult version. It's 193 pages. There's also an adult version, which is 239 pages. I say that for a reason. I taught 7th and 8th grade. For the average 7th grader and the average 8th grader, the young adult version is very appropriate. They like it, they enjoy the story, there's even some pictures in it. For the advanced 8th grader, I used the adult version. They liked it better. It's a little bit longer, it's more challenging, and I did this alongside Anne Frank. We did Anne Frank the play for most students, but for the advanced students, we did Anne's actual diary. Well, the translation, Anne's diary is not in English. But we also did this with students, formed reading groups, and did this book on their own at night and outside the classroom, and we only dedicated one day of the week to our discussion of this. Again, all of these are up here. Every book that I talk about is up here if you want to look at them at the end, and you'll get all of this shared with you come springtime. Second book I want to talk about, and this is a personal favorite because I know this gentleman's family. Murray Ebner is from Columbus, Ohio. And, well, he's not from Columbus. He lived in Columbus, Ohio until his death in the 1990s. But this is his story of growing up in Poland, being taken to a concentration camp, going through several different concentration camps, getting returned to, after liberation, to his hometown to find no one. He spent the next several years in Europe looking for family members, found none. He actually had relatives in America, so he came to America, built a new life in Columbus, and actually opened the Ebner Center, which is a shelter for refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish, into the Eastern Ohio area, where people could come and learn and get help on navigating moving to America. Actually, if you ever get to go to Columbus, the Ebner Center is definitely worth visiting. And this family actually paid for my trip to Poland with Classrooms Without Borders to tour all the places that Murray had been through when he was there as a child. Next up, Hidden, the true story of the Holocaust, the story of Fania Gottesfield. This is a short book. It's only 100 pages. An avid reader in 7th or 8th grade will finish this the day you give it to them. I know this for a fact because I've watched them do it. I gave it to them, said we'll talk about this next Monday. On Tuesday, they were ready because they took it home and read the book. It's very fast. It's a very neat story. She comes from a poor family. They go into hiding, and actually she's hidden. Her family is hidden by her boyfriend, who is an Aryan, who becomes part of the police department in the town. This is in eastern Poland. Under pressure, the boyfriend eventually gives up the family, but they do survive. She comes to America. She's able to spend her adult life. She marries. She's able to spend her adult life going to schools and going to universities, actually going onto television and presenting her stories. I do want to stress that with all of these. Murray Ebner went back and was able, when he came to America, was able to talk to schools and universities about what he did. He published his book. PBS made it into a movie. Mona Golombek, Lisa's daughter, is a musician herself. She's an accomplished classical pianist. She tours the country and tells her mother's story, plays her mother's music, and presents to high school and middle school students. She came to Pittsburgh. For those who are from Pittsburgh, she presented at the Byam Theater 3 years ago to a packed house of middle and high school students. Did a tremendous job. So all of these people, when they came to America, went on and presented their story to the world. Next, this one, the next two, as a matter of fact, you can bring them both up at once if you don't mind. These are both by Elton Zolo. These are made for middle school students. The first is Escape, Children of the Holocaust. The second is Heroes of the Holocaust. They're both collections of short tales, usually about 15 to 17 pages per tale. What I did with this is I took my class, divided it into 5 groups, gave each group one story. The next day they came in, they sat as a group and compared what they'd learned. The third day they taught. So this book, the first one it says right on here, 7 stories in the first book and 6 in the other. So you can do this in 1 week, have your students working in groups, do both books. And no student ever learns as much as what they have to teach. So they pay very much attention to it. They sit and they work diligently in their groups. Then they go and they present to the class. And as Amy pointed out, middle schoolers really don't like standing up in public and talking. Middle schoolers love recording themselves. So that makes it very, very easy. I once when I was in 5th grade, messed up reading out loud. And I'm not shy. I talk constantly, often way too much. But I mispronounced the word peculiar in 5th grade. And the teacher allowed the students to laugh. So from that point on, I never, ever have required a student to present in front of a class. But I will let them record and present. Some are hams. Some want to come up here, sing, dance, and have a good time, show off the cute outfit or the nice hair. Let them if they want to. But always give them that choice otherwise to record themselves. And some of them, I personally have a face that's good for radio. They don't want to be recorded that way. Let them do it as a podcast. That works just as well. Don't worry, my wife's the one that told me that about the radio. But she puts up with me, so it's okay. These next, and Nick Haberman is in the audience. Nick works closely with the writer of these. Chutzpah. Is Barbara still here? Barbara talked about the graphic narrative. Don't call it a comic book. Call it what it is. It's a graphic narrative. Chutzpah was published by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. Lamont Walker, who is in residence at the Holocaust Center, is the main driving force behind it. But there are many authors, there are many artists involved. 4 volumes, 20 stories. Each story will take a group less than a class period to read. They love it for a very simple reason. A reluctant reader will read a book because it doesn't have 1,000 words on a white piece of paper. They're pictures. The first one tells stories of people who ended up coming to Pittsburgh. And then you have one on children, one on women, superheroes of the Holocaust. Kids love these. I have taught these to what my school would call the co-taught. It's a learning support classroom. I've taught this with gifted students. It's worked just as well with both groups. They love this story, and it was brought up earlier, actually it was Ann that asked, about kids doing comics themselves. Every one of them will tell you they can't draw. I can't draw. I say that, but Lamont convinced me that I could, and he came to my school and worked with the kids, and they did art. So if you're from the Pittsburgh area, get a hold of the Holocaust Center. Nick's right back there drinking his coffee. He can help you do that. Lamont would love to come to your school and talk to your students, and the kids love him. All of these books have been what I call individual or group reading. I never taught any of them as the whole class project. I had the kids doing these on their own outside of class, and then once or twice a week bringing them into the class. This following is what I always managed to do, and Frank, do my Holocaust unit, and use that as what I would call our mini research unit. So the next several books I'm using are classroom resources. Your school is not going to buy a class set of this. They're not. This is The Righteous Among the Nations. It's published by Yad Vashem. It is a collection of short biographical sketches of not all, but many people who have been named righteous among the nations. These are Holocaust heroes. What I did with this is mini research, have a kid pick one person from the book, research that person's life, present that person's life. Again, this is a 3 or 4 day activity, but they learn. If there's 30 kids in class, they learn 30 different stories of 30 different people who went out of their way and risked their lives to save others. It's a fantastic volume, very, very detailed. And as I said, your school will not buy you a set of these. This one here, this one the kids really enjoyed. This is titled Witness, Passing the Torch of the Holocaust Memory to New Generations. It's published by I'm going to mess up the name, the March of Remembrance. This is published by that group. Here it is, it's right in here. And what this has is it's an app, Digimark app. I can show you one of them right here. Your students can download the app, or I put it on my phone and let the kids borrow my phone. Be careful doing that. Don't let them find your pictures. Don't let them find your Facebook. Don't let them find anything weird that they can use against you, because there's pictures of me back like from the 90s when I had some hair, and they thought that was hilarious because I was bald on the top and had a ponytail in the back. It was hot. You wouldn't believe it. But The kids can hit this on their phone, scan this little app right here, and it brings up stories, videos, documents of things involving the Holocaust and the March for Remembrance. It's a very, very cool book. The kids like it because it brings their technology into the world. Many of them did download the app themselves. I told them not to because that's how you get yourself in trouble with your superintendent, having kids download stuff onto their phone. Next up, 2 books by Michael Berenbaum, published by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The World Must Know is 250 pages. Again, your school's not going to buy you a class set. It's big. It's about $30 or $40 when I bought mine, and that was 5 or 6 years ago. A lot of photographs. Some of the photographs, and I do this I'm very serious about this. One of the mantras for Holocaust education has to be the kids enter your room safely, the kids leave your room safely. There are pictures in this book that are not appropriate for 6th graders and 7th graders. 8th graders, it's right on the edge. That's why I won't show Schindler's List or Night and Fog or any movies like that, because they're too graphic. This one here, you have to be careful with. But kids doing research, I opened it, perfectly fine page. It's the shoes at Auschwitz. It doesn't do it justice. If you've been to Auschwitz, this does not do that room justice, but it gives the students an idea that they can base their lives upon. There's also poems and different artworks throughout this book. It's Michael Berenbaum. If you've done any Holocaust work at all, you know who Michael Berenbaum is. You respect his work. Last, also Michael Berenbaum, and I've had this forever. I treasure this book. This is A Promise to Remember. It's only 45 pages long. But each of the pages has something like this. It pulls out pictures, documents, records, letters. The poster. On each page, there's something like this that the kids could pull out and look at. The last 4 that I used, these are for kids doing individual research projects. Finding this is going to be a challenge, but if you can find it, it's worth every penny for the kids using it for research projects, because it gives them, it's not a primary document, it's a copy of a primary document. That's about as close as you're going to get. That's what I have. Last thing, again, Elie Wiesel, he who listens to witness becomes the witness. These books were written by witnesses. We have studied the Holocaust. We are witnesses. We are creating a generation of witnesses, hopefully, that will keep the story going so that eventually at some point in the history, never again will be true. My information right there, if you need to get a hold of me, I can send all of this to you whenever you want. Feel free to contact me. Again, when this is over, every one of the books I mentioned is staying over there. Ann?
Wow, Dan sent me his list ahead of time, and I read all of his notes about it, and I knew of books that I wanted to use, but his presentation of them is so inspiring that I've got to find more time in my class. So thank you, Dan. Oops, sorry. Maybe, there we go. Okay, just laying out our game plan here today. We're going to start with, first of all, why is there a need to tell more of the story beyond the Anne Frank story? And Dan and I have had conversations about Night. These are the 2 watershed books that everyone knows about, right? And people who don't know about other titles that they can use tend to default to those books. Dan and I are both gifted specialists, so Gifted kids can tend to be particularly sensitive. They can take things in very deeply. So even though their classmates may be able to handle certain content, it may just traumatize them. Even typical 8th graders, though, we have reservations about using night and its graphic aspect with kids that young. And realistically, in most cases, high schools are going to be teaching that book. So let's leave that for the 10th grade teachers. And these, we found great books that we can use with the middle schoolers. There's no shortage of them. So we're going to look at 3 things: resistance with the Courier Girls, resistance with the Oneg Shabbat, and the Jewish escape from occupied Denmark. And then we should have some time for questions and suggestions. But please, I'd love for this to be interactive. If you have suggestions and questions as they come up, just like jump in. So why do we need to broaden the story beyond Anne Frank in hiding in an attic in Amsterdam? The Claims Conference did a survey in 2018 in the United States. There were a lot of great questions on there, got some really rich data, but here's one question that they asked that the result is a little startling. From what you know or have heard, what was Auschwitz? That first column is all US adults and their responses, and the second column is millennials. So 2/3 of millennials in the United States have no clue what Auschwitz is. Similarly, who or what do you think caused the Holocaust? I don't know which is worse. 10% of US adults and 15% of US millennials say the Jews caused the Holocaust. So there is work for us to do. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has its own pedagogical principles that align very closely with these from Echoes and Reflections, one of the leading Holocaust education organizations. The books that I'm going to share tend to focus on 3 of these: contextualizing the history. All of these definitely teach the human story, bring it down to the narrative of individual people for our students. But again, what Dan and I are talking about with middle schoolers is ensuring that supportive learning environment. So with middle schoolers, they're ready for some rich content, but they're not ready for some of the more graphic aspects of the Holocaust. So how can we bring them some of the reality without traumatizing them? So this is a fantastic book about the Courier Girls, and I am going to put you on the spot. I need a little interaction here. As you look at this cover, before I say anything else about it, what do you notice and what do you wonder just from this cover? And notice and wonder are very superficial. Don't go too deep. This is just a middle school classroom. Amy.
All right. I noticed that she seemed dressed pretty nicely, and I wonder if her red headscarf has some significance.
So she's dressed pretty nicely, and could her red headscarf have any significance? So you can do a notice or a wonder. You don't have to be an overachiever like Amy and do both. Kim. Kim says she notices that she's standing, she looks like she's confident. She's standing confidently. There's another one. Go ahead. Looks like the coat and bag indicate that she's traveling. Yes. Looks like her shadow doesn't match her coat and bag. Look at the shadow. I did not catch that until I was putting this presentation last night, and I pulled up the original picture, and I was like, I've read the adult version of this book. I've read the young adult version of this book, did not catch that about the shadow until I compared it to the original picture. So the shadow looks like maybe she's holding a rifle. Okay, so The Light of Days, I'm sure you noticed the subtitle, The Untold Story of Women Resistance Fighters in Hitler's Ghettos, is focused on women and, frankly, girls. Judy Battalion does not like using the term courier girls because she thinks it's pejorative. I think when I read her book, in many cases it's accurate because many of these young women were not yet 18. We're talking as young as 14, 16, 17. So there really were girls who were taking on this work. The courier girls are the focus of her book, but there are other members of the resistance doing other acts of resistance who are featured in the book too. So I just want to share a couple of them. This is Renia Kukelka, who was 14 when the war began, and she started her work. This photograph is after she escaped to Budapest in 1944. So she's in Benjamin. And this is a rigorous text with really powerful advanced text, but also some of the ELA topics that you can, if you're trying to cover ELA standards through Holocaust literature, a great one for this book is that idea of shifting perspectives. So we also go on to Frumka Plotnicka, I practiced this last night, Plotnicka, here she's in Białystok in 1938, and she's about to go to Warsaw. She works in the Warsaw Ghetto at the age of 25. Bella Hazan and Lanka Kozbrowska worked together in the northern region of Poland. This is a famous photograph where Bella was just about 18 years old, and she was a blonde girl. You can't tell in this photograph, so she passed for Christian and got a job in the Gestapo office in Grodno. So she was a Gestapo officer, had a crush on her, and invited her to the Gestapo Christmas party. Thank goodness these two friends of hers were visiting at the time, so she's like, come to the party with me. And they took a picture of these three girls together. So this is from a Gestapo Christmas party, and each of the girls got a copy. This photo is going to come back to cause a problem for Bella later on. I won't give that part of it away, but I really wrestled with whether to tell you this part, but I think it's important for you as educators to know that this is why this expands on the story of the Holocaust. Is these are not all happy stories. These women are going through difficult circumstances, trying to hide and pass, and as you're reading this book, that anxiety of trying to pass all the time, and that at any moment they could be caught and discovered and have terrible things happen to them, and terrible things do happen to some of them, including Lanka and Bella are very good friends. They help each other survive. They end up going to Auschwitz together, and Lanka dies in Bella's arms. Gusta Davidson is a courier based in Krakow, and the reason that I talk about shifting perspectives is we've got about 12 young women in this book, and look, they are scattered all over Poland. So Battalion makes this story progress chronologically, which makes sense, but by staying chronological, she's moving from person to person and place to place. That's a lot to keep track of through a narrative. If this is too long, if you don't have enough time for this whole book, or if it's too rigorous for some of your students, there are chapters that really could be standalone stories. So in chapter 18, there's the story of Witka Kempner and Ruszka Korczak, who escaped from the Vilna ghetto with Abba Kovner, and who is usually the center of the story in the Vilna ghetto. But these two women were sabotage experts. They were the first, not Abba Kovner wasn't with them. They went out and were the first to bomb a German train. So that could be a story, that could just be an excerpt that you have the students read, just that chapter on their own. An interesting parallel, like Dan was talking about using books in pairs. So you could do this in pairs, or this book, Beyond Courage, is about 25 resistance stories, so it centers the Jewish experience. And these have stories of about 5 to 10 chapters each. Okay, we're getting there. But it's a it's a more forgiving reading level. So this one does focus a little bit more on Abba Kovner, but it has these two women in it. So wouldn't interesting for students who are at that level, wouldn't interesting compare and contrast, or if you need text students reading at different levels, you could share the same story with different resources. Vlad Kamid is possibly the most famous of the career girls. She doesn't come up that much in Battalion's book. She lets other people tell that story. She devotes one chapter to Vlad Kamid. So again, this could be a standalone story. Vlad Kamid smuggled in arms in the Warsaw Ghetto, and she also watched out for children hiding on the Aryan side. So these women, in a time when they could be shot on the spot if they were discovered outside the ghetto, we're carrying false papers, we're carrying money, we're carrying news, we're helping people transport between these ghettos across Poland. So Dan introduced us to these lovely options for the printed word, and I want to pose some other options in terms of multimedia. So Echoes and Reflections has a wonderful podcast series of 6 podcasts that are just about 15 minutes each. There's one devoted to Vlad Kamid that includes Vlad Kamid's own voice, her own oral testimony. So again, it would be wonderful to pair just this chapter from Battalion with that podcast and have the students do a compare and contrast. But if you have a student whose learning preferences tend toward the auditory, the podcast can serve as a text in itself, because the standards say that we're also supposed to teach students to analyze non-print text. Another one is chapter 25 in this book is Anna Heilman. There's some discrepancy about her age. Battalion has her at 14 going to Auschwitz with her sister Esther at age 19. And they were among the women who smuggled gunpowder from the munitions factory for the Sonderkommando revolt. Now, the Sonderkommando revolt is also mentioned in Beyond Courage. There's a chapter about the Sonderkommando revolt in here. You need to know, though, that if you end up doing that, Dan was talking about the safely in, safely out. Since we're talking about middle schoolers, just be aware, if you're taking notes, page 148 in that part, this one focuses first on the Sonderkommando himself, a specific Sonderkommando, and it does describe his work. So if that might be a little bit too much for your students to handle, that may not be the text you want to use, or you may just choose it for students who you know could handle it. But this one also has a fantastic podcast that Anna Heilman is interviewed in this podcast from Echoes and Reflections. So again, getting back to the shifting perspectives, there aren't new cities and ghettos with these particular women. But again, their stories are getting laced with the others, so it just adds to the complexity factor that you're looking for with your advanced students. What I love about The Light of Days is it preempts, hopefully, or if your students have managed to ask it first, that question about why didn't they fight back? Like here is 250 pages of women fighting back. It does kind of trade on the readers knowing about what happens in Warsaw in April 1943, because every chapter title has the month and the date on there. So it's clearly a march to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, but then what happens after that? And frankly, not all of these women have happy stories if they survive the war. So it talks about their time in Israel and the displaced persons camps too. But I feel like this is like one of the most definitive answers that can refute that they did not go like sheep to the slaughter. Again, because we're talking about using these for middle school students. I did read the adult version. It's a little bit different, and a little more extensive. There is, again, if you're taking notes, on page 146, there is mention about the possibility of sexual assaults, but a sexual assault never happens. Alone, Renya left the city and walked toward the forest to find shelter for the night. At some point in the night, a man appeared out of nowhere and approached her. He was drunk and sat down near her. She moved away, and he moved closer. Sexual violence against women was common during the Holocaust, and Renya had no one to protect or defend her. And then this other one is a little more subtle on page 127. There is discussion about Jews joining the non-Jewish Polish partisans in the forest. And Battalion actually gives pretty detailed information about why the Poles were not the non-Jewish Poles were not particularly welcoming to have the Jews join them in the partisan units in the forest. But she has this line: many women had to become romantically involved with men they didn't care for because they were dependent on them for survival. So just to know, if you have a student who can read between the lines, that might be something that they might ask about. Okay, let's go on to the Oneg Shabbat and do another note. Oh, first of all, this is based on Who Will Write Our History, which Samuel Casso wrote. It's a 500-page book that I will read in retirement because I will not get time to read the 500 pages before I retire. But luckily, there has been a 37-minute classroom version and a more extensive 90-minute version docudrama video that has been made that is designed for young, secondary students. So let's do another notice and wonder. What do you notice and what do you wonder when you look at that graphic? And can you read what those words say? Resistance comes in many forms. Yes, what do you notice? What do you wonder? The people are different sizes, leading you to believe they're different ages. Thank you. Yes? Looks like a quill pen as well as an arrow. Two of them have armbands and one does not, so resistance might be Jews and non-Jews. Does anybody know a ghetto where there were armbands instead of yellow stars? Warsaw. So can you tell anything? It's a little hard. Can you tell anything from the background there? And that's okay if you can't. Looks like the steeple of a church in the background. It looks like, yeah, ship mass. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so follow that white line up from the point of the pen. It's the milk can. So if you know the story of Oneg Shabbat, all these things are starting to register, right? If you don't, welcome to it, because it's one of the most wonderful stories. Well, I feel silly saying that, one of the most wonderful stories of the Holocaust, but it's a powerful story of Jewish resistance. So this particular video is told from the perspective of Rachel Auerbach, who is one of 3 people to survive the war, who worked under Emanuel Ringelblum, who was already a noted historian when the war started. He collected about 60 musicians and scientists and poets and artists and journalists to collect the story of the Warsaw Ghetto. At some point, they figured out, we are not going to survive the Warsaw Ghetto, but we want the story of the Warsaw Ghetto to survive so that the world knows. And then they started hearing stories from across Poland, so they even started collecting stories beyond the ghetto. So out of those 60, only 3 survived. Rachel Auerbach was one who was pushed trying to recover this hidden archive, which was buried in 3 separate caches. So to this day, only 2 out of the 3 have been discovered. The 3rd has not been found. So this video, wonderfully, is available for free on the Facing History website, the classroom version. So here's, again, thinking about how this can tie into the standards and what you would be doing in an ELA, or in this case also in a history classroom, is thinking about the ethics of these primary sources of photographs and video. So this is just going to be a very brief segment of an expert. You can see this comes early in the film. She's going to explain to us what we need to keep in mind as we view these images.
Almost all the photography that we have that documents the Holocaust was taken by Germans, by the German propaganda unit. I think it's really important that when people see these photographs that they understand.
Sorry. Tyler, do you know why it's not switching to what's on my screen? Oh. That's probably because I had it in presentation mode.
Temporarily end your presentation.
That's fine. Go ahead. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, let's get out of that real quick.
Is it showing up now?
Looks like it's kind of reconnecting. Should be. Let's do a fresh connection. Is it okay if we
Yeah.
mirror what's on your screen? Okay. Just give me one sec.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Take 2.
Stay here till it's running. Not quite running yet. I'm gonna try maybe just refreshing that page real quick.
Thank you.
Almost all the photography that we have that documents the Holocaust was taken by Germans, by the German propaganda unit. I think it's really important that when people see these photographs that they understand that they're seeing through a German lens. And the photographs are profoundly humiliating to the Jews who have been photographed.
And the reason that's introduced early in the film is because that some of the documentary footage that's used in the film comes from The Eternal Jew, which was a propaganda film actually with the Nazi propaganda unit filming in not only the Warsaw Ghetto, but the Łódź Ghetto, in the terrible conditions that they contrived for their Jewish prisoners in those ghettos. But they present the Jews, they twist those images to present the Jews as vermin and filthy and full of disease. So this is kind of a caveat to the beginning of the film. Since we don't have very much footage, we have this is the footage that we have. So I think this opens up a lot of opportunity for how do we look at photographs, how do we look at footage that is provided through history from the perpetrators themselves. But the value, I still think this film is very much worth sharing because it not only tells the story of the Oneg Shabbat, but it layers it on top of the story of the progression of events in the Warsaw Ghetto. So this is just 2 minutes of kind of that beginning of that narrative of the ghetto.
Saturday was terrible. The loudspeaker announced the division of the city into 3 parts: German, Polish, Jewish. Gradually, a ghetto is being established. The ghetto is closed, and a new era begins. A man who visited the other side tells of the great difference. The cafes are full of people, the streets not overcrowded as in the ghetto. Those who read horoscopes for the Jews say they are bad.
Emanuel Ringelblum understood
Sorry.
that he had a story to tell. But in order to do it justice, he couldn't do it alone.
Just 8 days after the ghetto was sealed, several of us met with Dr. Ringelblum at his apartment on 18 Lezhna Street.
Drei takonas. Als me sein besoides.
The whole institution was dubbed Oneg Shabbos, which means the joys of Shabbat, for reasons of secrecy.
So you can see that they stitch together interviews with experts, modern actors portraying certain scenes, and archival footage to tell the story. And another text, print text, that tells this story is called Word Smugglers by Amy McDonald, where Who Will Write Our History video tells the story a little bit from the perspective of a woman. This tells the story of the perspective of 2 teens, 16-year-old David Graber and 15-year-old Nahum Javich, who are the 2 people you saw. Well, 2 people are featured early in the film helping their teacher, Israel Lichtenstein. They buried the archive, but they did not survive. But the book Word Smugglers is self-published, so it has some repetitive aspects. But again, if this is something that you have struggling readers, it has 27 chapters, but each chapter is about 3 or 4 pages long. It's got a lot of photographs that are not at all gruesome. The idea that smuggling was necessary to survive in the ghetto comes through loud and clear across multiple chapters. But again, you can select specific, like kind of Dan was talking about with a research resource, just a couple of pages on some isolated topics from the Warsaw Ghetto that may be valuable. And Beyond Courage also has a chapter on the Oneg Shabbat. It's not it's not its best chapter, in my opinion. It doesn't tell the whole story as much as I would like. It's only about 5 pages long. Its richness comes in that it has a lot of quotes of items from the archive. So that could be something that you could share with your students, again, as kind of a complementary resource. And then finally, the Jewish escape from Denmark. This is the thing, a lot of students get their introduction to the Holocaust with Lois Lowry's Number the Stars, because when you have a whole country of Denmark ferrying almost every one of its 8,000 Jews to safety, that's the story that we find the least traumatic to share with the young middle schoolers. And I was at a conference once where a survivor was presenting, and she was adamant that we not use fiction to teach about the Holocaust. She said, don't use anything that's made up, don't use anything that's false. There are too many powerful, true nonfiction texts out there. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, so you don't want me to teach all of my ELA standards? Because I have a lot of reading literature standards that I have to use fiction for. And I did an entire year of both reading informational text and reading literature text with Holocaust text. This one crosses the line. It's an informational text, but it's in verse. So this would be a fantastic opportunity. You could teach your whole poetry unit with this. It tells the story of 22-year-old Henny Sinding, whose father was the head of the Danish lighthouse and buoy service. So she kind of used her connection there to get the four-man crew of the Gerda 3 in addition to its duties to supply the Broaden lighthouse in the strait between Denmark and Sweden. She also recruited them to ferry Jews to safety from Denmark to Sweden. But Henny had a big job in terms of secreting Jews through the night, watching out for the Gestapo guards, and trying to circumvent all the Nazi controls to capture these people before the deportation was about to begin. So again, 22, she's not too old, hopefully somebody that our students can relate to. Also, the Gerda 3 has survived. It actually is housed at the Mystic Seaport Museum. It's been restored to its actual World War II condition. So there's a 3-minute video on YouTube that takes a little tour of it. You could show your students. But also, there is, this is the one text that
I was a little boy, I was 10.
That departs from the rule of centering the Jewish experience, because Henny is a non-Jew. But I think a wonderful compliment is this animated, documentary by Bent Melchior, who tells of his family's escape and the whole community's escape. And again, there's so much we could do with visual literacy in the ELA classroom.
It started in 1939, when in April 1940, the Nazi Germany troops entered Denmark. We had no possibility to fight that invasion. So the Danish government decided to make an agreement with the Germans.
The Danish government developed an understanding with the German occupiers, one that allowed for the continuation of Danish civil government. One effect of the understanding was that Jews in Denmark were not singled out from the rest of the population.
One of the conditions to have that agreement was that the Jewish population of Denmark should be regarded as normal citizens of the country, and there should be no specific laws about the Jews. And the Germans agreed to that condition. Services in the synagogue continued. We were told to have a low profile, not to make any noise.
But this peace would not last forever. In the fall of 1943, the agreement between the Danish government and the Germans collapsed.
And that meant that the Germans could now do with the Danish Jews as they had done with Jews in all the other European countries they had conquered. and they didn't lose time. The Gestapo, the German police, had come to Copenhagen, and their plan was to arrest us and to deport us to the concentration camps. There were among the Germans people who were against the whole action and went to Danish politicians and gave away details of the whole raid, which was supposed to be taken on the night after Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, where they supposed that the Jews would be at home.
Suddenly, the Jews of Denmark has something that so few others in Europe had. Time. 48 hours. But what to do with them?
So this is just a nice supplement or contrast. So if you have students who tend to have their learning preferences more toward the visual, this would be a great discussion about the use of color and darkness and light. And this comes from the Jewish perspective. So we have looked at texts that kind of come from the perspective of women and teens, so we get that diversity of women, and there may be the opportunity also for a discussion with students about why the stories of women in the Holocaust have not been front and center up to now. Judy Battalion writes a whole essay on that. Also, the teen perspective helps link the students and the young adults, and I think we do a pretty good job of centering the Jewish experience. So I think I've left a whopping 30 seconds if people have questions. Oh, we do? Excellent. I can't believe I finished on time. Or are there texts that you use that you can share with us? Come on up to the microphone. So the Goethe 3 is owned by, help me out, it's owned by the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. They own it, but it is housed at the Mystic Seaport Museum in Connecticut because they have water. So they take care of it. And they do, like, I don't know if it's practical for anyone here, anyone online. If you're nearby, you can do a field trip there and go see it. Have you been there, Jessica?
Yes, it is totally worth it. It sometimes costs a lot,
Oh.
which is really incredible, but if you can get to Connecticut, it's completely worth it, and the people there will talk your head off and bring its way because they're so proud of what they have to take care of every day. It's a wonderful job, yeah.
Good, yeah. Do you have other things you would like to add?
I'm fine.
Are there any texts that you use that you can recommend?
Not recommend. You guys did a phenomenal job, and I've just been sitting here adding to my wish list, so I remember all of these later. But I just wanted to second, as I was up there earlier talking to you about Barbara's graphic, I am just a graphic novel person in general. So thank you for bringing the Chutzpah novels up. The great thing about those, so what I love about the graphic that I talked about earlier is that it tells a complete narrative, start to finish. The great thing about Chutzpah is it tells those individual stories, and there's always finding that balance whenever you're looking at history, trying to find the balance between what are those broader themes that are happening and then what is happening to those individual people. And also if you're looking for a local connection, heroes like Les Banos and people who have just phenomenal stories that connect to this region, and I know not everybody is from this region, are there. So I just wanted to second that and say thank you, but you guys did a great job with these resources. They're fantastic.
On a similar note, I have taught Barbara's book in my class, and it works very, very well. And that was with 8th graders.
Well, what a wonderful presentation. Let's give them a round of applause. Ann and Dan, thank you. Thank you so much. We're getting such good practical information today. There's a lot to learn, a lot to think about incorporating into classes. One thing I want to mention is Dan spoke about a number of books that you have used in the past, and I know these days so many of our resources are online, and you can find them on YouTube and Facing History and other places, but I would say that if your school could benefit from having hard copies of books or even electronic resources, we have a program that allows us to give funding, usually small grants up to about $500 to schools. So if that's something your school could use, just send me an email and you can make an application, and we'll be happy to consider it for funding. So, well, we're going along well here this afternoon, but it's time to take a short break. Our next speaker, Nick Haberman, is already in the building, and looking forward to hearing what Nick has to share with us. So let's take a break of about 20 or 25 minutes, and we'll start again with our next program.